Hi everyone, welcome to OUFF's short guide on how to use our Tier 1 equipment. We had to pre-record this, so I'm just putting this little message in here and then we'll go ahead and play the video essentially with my live voiceover. This will also be uploaded on YouTube, so don't worry if you can't make it or you miss it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask myself or Mary Dast, our tech officer. I'm sorry if this is slightly fast for all of you. I'll try and kind of make a screen of the camera settings that we recommend just for further reference, but we really just want to make it short so it's a good reference that people can go to when they're in the middle of a production, or if they're just starting to be a director of photography, something they can look at. And then there are loads of videos out there on YouTube, so please do kind of keep researching, ask us questions, ask other people questions, and yeah, hope you enjoy. So let's start with the tripod. Obviously you're always going to want to start with it in the bag, and you just unzip to open that up. When you're setting it up, just make sure it's got kind of a nice stable base, as shown here. Make sure nothing's wobbling around, and if you're extending the legs, clamp them. So this is the rail that attaches to the tripod. It should either be in the tripod bag or the camera bag. You screw that screw onto any one of the screws in the bottom of the camera, and then tighten it with a key or with a coin. The camera then has a side handle which you want to just make sure is properly fastened, and then you can slide your hand under the strap and use that for better support. So with the Manfrotto tripod, you want to slide the camera support in, and as you can see, it moves around quite a lot. So then you want to turn it around and go to that lever and just turn it until it's tight, and that's if you want it to stay in position. And then as you'll see, it won't move around. Now we'll show you some basics of the tripod. So if you turn that, that's just kind of the vertical angle of the camera, and then you also have an adjustable lever. So if you just unscrew that, you can then just change the angle depending on your filming needs. Okay, and now the lenses. So always start with the lens in the bag, and then with this lens, this is the Canon lens, you want to take the back cap off, and then as soon as you take that cap off, you want to cover the open section with your hand to make sure no dust or any particles enter. Then put the back cap back in the case just to avoid losing it, and then we'll come over to the camera. So you want to press that silver button and turn until the protector comes off, and then you'll see that there's also a little red mark on the lens. You want to match that up with the mark on the camera and then turn until you hear it click. Once that's on, make sure to put the protector back in the bag and then put the bag back into the porta brace. Okay, so now let's move on to the battery. So as you'll see, the batteries will be stored in the side of the porta brace bag. That's the front of it. We'll show you the back. So as you'll see, there's a kind of little V on the back of the battery there, that will go into that. So you want to start it high and slot it down. It will click into place again. The side button shows you how much battery life you have left, and if you want to take it out, press the button on the left side and pull it up. To charge those, you then want to slot that into the charger, plug the cable into the wall, and make sure the switch is set on the 2-line mark. Okay, so now when we get to the camera, we're going to open it by pressing that little button, opening that field monitor. That can be turned around, as you can see, and then you want to click the button on the side of the camera to turn it on. You only have to press this once, you don't have to hold it. Okay, now we have the camera on, we're going to go through memory cards. So the memory cards, as you'll see, have a short section on the top and a long section on the bottom. The short section goes on the top and it slides into the side section of the camera. You can also see that it has an arrow. To take them out, you then just press the buttons and remove them. Okay, so if then we pop those back in, we can then choose what format we're filming in. You can film in RAW or ProRes. We recommend ProRes. 422 Ultra HD is perfectly fine for your needs. Once you've chosen that, you want to press the menu button again, and then you want to go to the bottom of the screen where it says the minutes, and click that and click Format Card. You then choose Windows or Mac. So for me, for example, I have a Mac laptop, so I choose that. That will tell the card how we're recording, what we're recording in, and it will also wipe the card from all footage. So make sure you've backed this up before you start. Now let's have a slightly closer look at the actual interface you'll see when you turn the camera on. So first we'll start with the top left, FPS. That is literally how many frames per second the camera takes in and writes onto the memory cards. 24 is absolutely fine if you're just beginning. It captures a nice range of motion. If you're doing things that are really fast, you might want to increase it a little bit. Keep in mind it can change how your footage looks and how movement looks especially. I think a good rule of thumb is always have the FPS at least half of your shutter speed. So for example, if your shutter speed is 180, you never want to go over 90 FPS, which is kind of ridiculously high anyway, so I don't know why you would. Okay, so shutter speed. I'm just going to say don't interfere with this too much, leave it at 180 unless you know what you're doing. Okay, we'll leave iris for now and we'll go to ISO. So the native ISO for this camera is 800. All that means is at 800 it is absorbing the maximum amount of data from that image. So you want to kind of leave it at 800 unless you're going for a specific look. White balance is the tint, if you will, of your picture. You can then click on this. If you click, it's all touchscreen. If you click on it, you'll see that there are different settings for cloudy, for indoors, for sunny, etc., etc. The top right is the battery. You can also check this on the battery itself, as we've seen. And then the bottom left, you have a histogram. This is a kind of pictorial representation of the color that your image is receiving. As a rule of thumb, you want most of the data on it to be more to the right side of it than the left. So you want the kind of peaks to be on the right. But that's ideal, and it doesn't matter if they're not. But you don't want that to be flat. The higher it is, the more data it's receiving. So then at the top, sorry, I forgot to mention, that's the time. You can click that to say the actual time of day, or you can click it to say time that has been spent recording. At the bottom there you have the red circle. You can click that to start recording, but you can also press the red button on the side of the camera, and we recommend pressing that button just because it makes it a bit easier to have an actual tactile thing. The bottom two, 120 minutes and 96 minutes, are the respective minutes of footage on each card. We've already been over that, so that's pretty self-explanatory. And that thing in the bottom right is just to do with audio levels. We assume you'll probably be using a separate audio recorder, so don't worry about that too much. Now going back to the iris. Before I start, I'd just like to say, please go and look this up for yourself. I'm not an expert at this. I know the basics, but we really recommend that you look this up. Essentially what the iris does is stylistically determine the depth of field. So for example, in the example of this picture, it's quite a shallow depth of field. The lower the iris, the greater the depth of field. So the smaller the number, the greater the depth of field. And the greater the number, the shallower. So if you have a really high number, things won't seem as offset in the foreground and the background, if that makes sense. So you want to determine this stylistically and then use a variable filter to change the exposure, because when you change the iris, you'll see that the exposure of the image changes drastically. But don't worry, we'll show you how to do this in a second. Going back to the tutorial, take the lens cap off very carefully and put it back in the camera bag. We'll then input those settings: ISO 800, frame rate 24, shutter speed 180. Remember, this is just a guide, feel free to experiment. So say I want a great depth of field. That means I want things in the foreground to be very much focused and things in the background to be very much unfocused. So I want a small iris. When I drag that though, you'll see it becomes very much overexposed. How do we combat that? The Blackmagic has a tool called Zebras, which it tells you when the camera has capped, when there's too much light information. So you go to the top left, you see that zebra mark and click on. So then when you change the iris to a smaller number, it will go in a funny pattern, as you can see. So you want to expose it as much as you can without entering that pattern, and then use a variable filter to get the exposure that you'd like. So this is a variable filter. It will be in the Tiffin case, and as you can see, it allows more and less light into the lens depending on how you twist it. So it attaches by a ring, so you want to just screw it onto the inside of the lens. Once it's on, you can then turn it clockwise or anti-clockwise to change the exposure of your image. That way you can get stylistic choice over both focal depth and exposure without having to compromise on one or the other. You then press record again to stop recording, and you're done. Turning the camera off is very simple. Simply hold the button, close the monitor, and put everything back in its case. So the variable filter goes back in the tiffin case, the battery comes off and goes back into the porta brace bag. We're then going to take the lens cap, put the lens cap back on. We should have done this when we stopped filming actually. And then we're going to take the lens off the camera. Ideally you have an assistant camera to help you do this. So you want to press that button again, twist it and put that cap on as soon as possible. If you can, have someone hold their hand over the entrance, but as soon as possible put that cap back onto the camera and twist it until it clicks. The click is very audible. Make sure that you put everything back in its bag. I can't stress this enough because we don't want this kit getting damaged. You then unscrew the tightening valve on the tripod and slide that camera off while pressing the button on the left side to release it. Put the camera then face down in the porta brace bag, supported by the lens bag as well. Make sure there's nothing underneath it, and you want to fold the tripod inwards and then put that safely back in its case. Thanks for watching guys, and please just let us know if you have any questions. That was kind of a basic guide. We apologise if it was quite brief. I want to stress very much that that is not a how to do it, it is how to start. You should look up for yourself kind of how to use this camera. There are hundreds of tutorials on YouTube, so if you want to get more of an idea, please just keep on looking that up. I'd also like to say that I forgot, to include how to offload the cards, the CFast cards, onto a laptop, onto a hard drive. It's very simple. Inside the porta brace bag is a card reader. You just take that out and plug that into the laptop and then plug the card into the card reader. Thanks guys for watching, and I hope to see you soon.